The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Huizenga, who also is Vice Chairman of the Full Committee, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Dr. Cohen, good seeing you again. It has been a while. I was around first time you were in, but the Federal Reserve System, and there's been a lot of talk about the dual mandate. It actually is focused on 3 key monetary policy objectives: maximum employment, price stability, and moderation of long-term interest rates. Somehow that seems to get sort of forgotten. I'm going to ask you a too high, too low, or about right for a response to this question. Are interest rates right now too high, too low, or about right? Dr. Cohen.
So I don't have a judgment on what
Okay.
the right level. They
All right,
embody people's
I
expectations.
don't have time for an explanation. Do you
Okay.
think they're about right?
They're about right for what people expect.
Okay. Mr. Wang.
Today, the 10-year yield is about 4%. I think that's about right.
Okay. Dr. Michel.
Sure. I have really no idea, and I don't think they do either.
Okay. Mr. Kozel.
They're slightly restrictive, which I think is appropriate given inflation right now.
So too low.
Slightly too high.
Too high. Slightly too high.
Appropriate,
Okay.
but higher than they should
right.
be in the long run.
Great. So I wasn't here for the creation of Dodd-Frank 2010. I got elected in 2010, but I've been living with the echo effects of it ever since. I believe that today the Fed has even more power, more influence, and more control over our financial system than ever before, while improvements, as Dr. Cohen, you had said, have happened in transparency, partially because of the push that came out of this committee. It does, I believe, remain shrouded in mystery to most of the American people. And frankly, we're not talking about groundbreaking stuff right now. I mean, these are things that we talked about over a decade ago, and we were asking many of the same questions. How could the Fed be more transparent to Congress and the American people? How could they communicate its policy choices better, and then direct in the direction it was taking so that consumers and investors could make informed decisions about today and the future? Dr. Michel, let's start with you. You noted and cited a paper by economist John Taylor, one of my favorites, titled Monetary Policy Rules Work and Discretion Doesn't. As you know, Dr. Taylor became famous for the Taylor Rule, which essentially has a suggestion of guides how central banks could adjust interest rates to stabilize economic activity. I had suggestion when Chair Yellen was in here that she could create the Yellen Rule. It didn't really matter what it was, but were there some rules that were published? Now, everybody says, well, we do this behind the scenes, but the problem is it's behind the scenes, and nobody really knows what they are doing. They're seeing a guessing game. So could you explain to the committee, Dr. Michel, how something like the Taylor Rule or the Yellen Rule or any other rule could have impacted the Fed's decision during the most recent economic downturn?
Sure. If we go by the standard, any of the standard rules really that are accepted by macroeconomists, then in that case, yes, rates are too restrictive at the moment. If they had been following a rule, at the very least, we would know what they're doing and why they're doing it. And by we, I mean you guys, Congress, and I think that's the most important thing. There's no way to judge how good or how badly they're doing because you don't really know what they're doing.
Okay.
And that's why a rule is important.
Would something like the Form Act,
Yes.
which had been a piece of my legislation, would that be a good starting point?
No, I think that's a perfect starting point because it provides what we call a flexible rule. They put a base rule in place, they can pick the rule that they like, and they can stick to it until they don't, as long as they explain to Congress what they're doing that's different and why.
I'm running out of time, so I'm having to jump around here a little bit. Obviously, the Fed now sets rates administratively, partly through interest on reserve balances, and there's significantly more reserves in the system now. I don't want to put words in Dr. Cohen's mouth, but it almost sounded like you said it doesn't really matter what the reserves are. What I need to know, though, is has the Fed incentivized financial institutions to hoard reserves instead of putting capital to work for the real economy?
I think the liquidity regulations put a premium on holding liquidity, and they need to look carefully at that as to whether they're over-incentivizing holding liquidity. I don't think they are. It's important for financial stability. So I agree that there are adjustments, Mr. Wang said, to the leverage ratio that could be made that enable banks to intervene more aggressively in stabilizing the Treasury market, and that would be helpful. For example, exempting reserves from the leverage ratio.
Okay, but time has expired. We may be following up with some written questions. I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from California, the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Waters.